I got a note from a millennial titled One Millennial's Plea, I guess. And I wanted to share it with you and riff on it because, I keep getting these calls and sometimes I can't tell, is this person just, like brand new to politics and just beginning to discover these things? For example, how the American political system works? Or is the person that I have on the line a shill for the Trump campaign? And I think probably 9 out of 10 times it's the former, not the latter. It's and I'm there's no doubt in my mind that this is the former. And so I wanted to share it with you and riff on this a little bit and get your thoughts on this. There's a lot of other things happening, by the way. The killing of Mr. Scott in what is it, North Carolina, is continuing to roil the news. The killing in Oklahoma, of course, the officer has now been charged, but the family has seen the video and they're saying, and others who have seen the video are saying, it doesn't look like he's doing anything that justifies being killed or even being shot. So anyhow, we'll see where this plays out. We'll just keep an eye on this one. This is, and again, back to national standards for policing. I mean, maybe the first part of those national standards should be, video gets immediately released. But anyhow, back to the millennials. Realizing that, interestingly, when we look at the demographics of this show, we have a lot of baby boomers who listen and watch, but we also have a lot of millennials who listen and watch. In fact, it's that area in between the 40s and 50s where we have the smallest audience. But people in their 20s and 30s and people in their 50s and 60s are big, I really think that the boomer generation and the millennial generation have been the two activist generations of my lifetime. And, perhaps there's a new form of activism that's different than what I experienced, when I was the age of millennials. But I think not. I think something very similar is going on. Although I'll tell you, I was out there chanting, "Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?" Very happy to see Lyndon Johnson gone, and frankly, Hubert Humphrey too, because he was the extension of the Johnson administration that was doing the war in Vietnam. I had no idea. Now, I didn't vote for Richard Nixon. Frankly, in the 72 election, well, in the 68 election, for that matter. In the 68 election, I was too young to vote. In the 72 election, frankly, I don't remember if I voted or not. If I did, it would have been Democratic. But in any case, back to this. He says, I'm grateful that I was exposed to you and your knowledge as I transitioned from high school into college through the depths of the recession and the dramatic 2008 presidential campaign. You gave me direction and provided me with food my soul had been starving for. I'm undoubtedly indebted to you. Well, thank you. Thank you for listening all those years. This year, however, you and your generation, for the most part, blew me away. Thom Hayden endorsed Hillary. I don't know where I'd be without the Port Huron Statement. Well, yeah, I mean, the Port Huron Statement is what established SDS. And it was a statement about racial and social justice. It really wasn't about the war in Vietnam. SDS sort of morphed into an anti-war organization, but it started out as a social justice movement. And I commend to you Thom Hayden's, he was the Thomas Jefferson of the Port Huron Statement. It wasn't exclusively his work, but it was largely his work, just like the Declaration of Independence was largely Jefferson's. He says, and both Thom Hayden and I have, been on this planet long enough to have seen just the insane damage that Republican presidents do, principally by putting right-wingers on the Supreme Court. I mean, you'd have no Citizens United. You would have had no Buckley versus Vallejo. You would have, we would not have politicians right now being wholly owned by corporations and billionaires if it weren't for the political appointees on the Supreme Court of Republican presidents. It's really that simple. Richard Nixon put Lewis Powell on the court after Lewis Powell wrote the Powell Memo in 71. He put him on the court in 72, and in 76, Powell authored the decision in Buckley versus Vallejo, which said that giving money to political campaigns, billionaires and corporations, giving money to political campaigns, giving money to politicians, supporting them through super PACs and things like that, although they didn't have super PACs back then, but the equivalent, is no longer to be considered bribery or behavior. It is now considered First Amendment constitutionally protected free speech. And that changed our politics in America completely. And then Citizens United amplified that. And Citizens United would not have been, it was a 5-4 decision. It would not have been decided the way it was if it wasn't for Republican appointees on the Supreme Court. And Thom Hayden and I have seen that kind of damage, the destruction of our democracy, the turning of our country over to the plutocrats. Jimmy Carter coming on this program saying we're now a plutocracy, or we're now an oligarchy was the phrase he used. He said, with unlimited political bribery. We've seen the destruction of the working class over the last 40 years as a result of Republican presidencies. We've seen Republicans put us in unending wars. You know, the first war in Iraq was George Herbert Walker Bush's. It was supposed to help him get reelected. He wanted to do it as a clean little 3-day war. In fact, he even encouraged Saddam Hussein to invade Kuwait so that he could then have a war against Saddam Hussein, knowing that in 3 days he could kick him out of there and get all kinds of political capital, to quote his son, George W. And that war, the remnant of that war, which was the U.S. Air Force base that was built in Saudi Arabia for the first Gulf War, for George Herbert Walker Bush's war with Iraq, that Air Force base was what caused Osama bin Laden to get so upset with us that we had an Air Force base on the Holy Land of Saudi Arabia that he chose us as his next target. So you could argue very strongly this all began with George Herbert Walker Bush, this whole mess in the Middle East. Not to mention the devastation of the lives of minorities with the war on drugs. The war on drugs began as an attempt by Richard Nixon to disenfranchise anti-war activists and people of color, and then got doubled down on by Ronald Reagan. Got super hyped up by George Herbert Walker Bush. Millennials, you're not old enough to remember this, but I remember very clearly when the DEA planted basically a drug dealer in the park across the street from the White House. And then they sent somebody out to buy a bag of crack from that guy so that President George Herbert Walker Bush could wave it on television and say, we bought this crack right across the street from the White House. And we've got to have stronger laws. We got to double down on the war on drugs, which he did. And, there's just, and not to mention destroying the environment to the point that we're on the brink of extinction. Republican presidents, dialing back environmental regulations, Ronald Reagan hiring James Watt as his Secretary of the Interior, who sold off hundreds of, tens of millions of acres, and in any case, millions of acres, let's say. I don't have the exact number in front of me, for pennies on the dollar of mineral and oil-producing lands and things to these companies. Anyhow, back to my Millennials email. He says, there's a song by the legendary songwriter and musician John Hartford called Where Were You When the Sky Began to Fall, telling people during the primary that it's okay to vote for Hillary Clinton is asinine. No, I'm telling you, during the primary, I said I support both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. I'm endorsing Bernie. I've been very clear about that all along. Any Democrat, even, not the most progressive Democrat, is better than any Republican, period. And they're really, given the fact that we've got a two-party system in the United States, and I've realized it's not written in the Constitution like this will be a two-party system, but that's how it works with first past the post, winner take all voting. We have a two-party system in this country. You're going to have either a Democrat or a Republican in the White House this fall, or next January 20th. It's going to be either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. These are your choices. You may not like it. I may not like it. But, actually, I'm okay with it, as long as it's not Donald Trump. Because Hillary Clinton has, according to Bernie Sanders, between 80 and 90% of Bernie's agenda. Now, I realize, young millennial, Joe, the guy who emailed me, that you probably don't know this. And you probably don't know this because of, the media. This Business Insider just published a brilliant piece by Thomas E. Patterson. He is the author of 3 reports done by the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, where he's on the faculty. The first report looks at the whole year of 2015. The second report looks at the first half of 2016. The third report looks at the second half of this year so far. And he says the report was based on a detailed content analysis of the presidential election coverage in 5 television networks, ABC, CBS, CNN, Fox, and NBC, and in 5 leading newspapers, Los Angeles Times, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, USA Today. Not a single, I'm quoting from the report, not a single policy proposal accounted for even 1% of Hillary Clinton's convention period coverage, and collectively, her policy stances accounted for a mere 4% of it. Media coverage of her emails was 11%. Policy, 1%. So he writes, what Clinton might do in the Middle East or with trade or the challenge of income inequality could reasonably be anyone's guess given how little attention her policy statements have received in the news. And he makes the point, policy issues lack novelty. The press wants novelty. They lack conflict. The press wants conflict. They want a horse race. So he says, now I don't engage in social media conversation. Well, let me continue this when we come back on the other side. But the reality is that there's some serious policy work being done by the Clinton campaign, by Democrats right across the board, that is going to influence not just your life if you're a millennial, but probably your children's lives. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I mean, as in the children you haven't even realized you're going to have's lives. This is stuff that Republicans do damage that lasts for generations. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Anyhow, my correspondent here, he says, now I don't engage in social media conversations or ever complain to people I disagree with. I believe it's more important to do one's own work. Please don't tell me you're going to follow Gary Johnson with the, it's all, I made my self-made man, all this kind of stuff. It's a me society, not a we society. I mean, Gary Johnson wants to privatize our schools. No more public schools. No financial support whatsoever for college. No more Social Security. Sell off our national parks. Put everything in the hands of big business and billionaires. That's Gary Johnson. Please don't even think about going down that route. And then he says, but I could not restrain myself, and I do apologize, but you're getting this because of the respect I have for you. My mind is just blown away by the decisions you and nearly the rest of the entire major figures of the left made this year. My friends and I talked about it every day during the primary. We're blown away by how out of touch your generation is. This generational gap must be bridged, and I have faith it will. I hope you'll be listening closer as to why Hillary Clinton is not an option for the millennial generation. And I may be pushing it here, but when you apologize for not going all in for Bernie because of fear for damaging Hillary, then I will listen to your program, though. Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean. I thought I was all in for Bernie, and I'm now all in for Hillary. And it wasn't, and yeah, there were people who stomped all over me for going all in for Bernie, saying, oh, you're going to hurt Hillary. I don't think so. I think it actually helped Hillary. I think Bernie substantially, he activated the Democratic base and then basically handed that to Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton changed many of her policy positions or strengthened many of her policy positions in areas where she was weak to comply with that, which I see as a good thing. It almost sounds like this young man is talking about the great man theory of history, the savior complex. We need the perfect person to save us. This is such bunk. There is no perfect person. Bernie was not a perfect person. And Bernie's policies, running into the reality of today's Congress would have been a real challenge. It's not to say I wouldn't, wouldn't have enthusiastically done everything I could to vote for him and support him. And similarly, you know, Hillary's going to have a challenge with these things too, if she becomes president. Now, if Donald Trump becomes president, forget it. Income inequality is going to get worse. The environment's going to go to hell in a handbasket. The human race might be extinguished. I mean, we're talking about really serious stuff here. Alaska is warming, you know, they're 6 degrees Celsius warmer now than they were in the 1980s, the northern parts of Alaska. It's massive what's going on with global climate change. And Donald Trump is a climate denier. We need a revolution in this country, and I hope you, young millennials or, you know, adult millennials, you can help make that happen. We need it. You know, I thought we were all voting for that. I mean, we all thought we were voting for a revolution with Obama. We didn't get a revolution. We got, you know, calm, competent leadership, but not the revolution. And, you know, maybe that will come with Hillary, but even if it doesn't, at least it'll be not a disaster. But I think actually Hillary is moving in some very positive directions. I realize that's a generality. I could give you a whole bunch of details, but so anyway, we'll continue this conversation after the break, and I'd love to get your calls. Stick around.